They laughed at me at my own father's funeral. But when the lawyer hit play on his final message, the room went silent. And when the will was read out loud, every smug smile vanished. You won't believe what happened next. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. They laughed at me. Right there, at my own father's funeral, I stood in front of them, my hands trembling slightly, as I held the last letter he ever wrote to me. I wore his favorite color, deep navy blue, the same color he wore every Sunday when we sat quietly in the garden, just the two of us. He'd always said blue reminded him of peace. I guess that's what I wanted to feel that day, peace. But instead I got laughter, not quiet, not awkward, but loud, cruel laughter that echoed through the church like thunder. My brothers Jake and Matt chuckled like schoolboys trying to stifle a joke. My sister Sarah shook her head and snorted under her breath, nudging Matt as if to say, "Here she goes again." The looks on their faces said it all: mockery, disbelief, even a hint of pity. They thought I was just being dramatic Emily. I always was, according to them. My name's Emily, and I'm 26, the youngest of 4 siblings, and apparently the only one with a heart. Ever since our mother passed away 8 years ago, it was like a switch flipped in our family. My siblings drifted away, absorbed in their own lives, their careers, their relationships, their money. My father, who had always been a strong, grounded presence in our lives, began to shrink physically and emotionally. He was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. It was a slow, painful decline. And during all of it, every hospital visit, every sleepless night, every medication run, it was me by his side. Not Jake, not Sarah, not Matt, just me. They never called, they never visited. At best, they sent him generic holiday cards with their names printed on the bottom. No messages, no love, no time. Dad didn't show it often, but I knew it hurt him. He would smile through it, say they were busy, but his eyes told the truth. In those final months, he talked a lot about regrets, about love, about the kind of people he hoped we'd become. He wasn't bitter, he never was, but he knew. He knew how they saw me, and I think a part of him wanted to protect me one last time. From them, that letter I held in my hand, it wasn't long, just a few words. But they meant everything, too. My dearest Emily, if they laugh, let them. Because they won't be laughing for long. Love, Dad. When I read it out loud at the funeral, they didn't understand. They laughed even harder. Sarah scoffed. Wow, even at his funeral, she's making it about herself. Matt mumbled, must be nice to still play Daddy's little girl. Jake just rolled his eyes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because later that day, we were all called to the office of Mr. Crenshaw, Dad's longtime attorney. It was a small gray room with shelves full of old books and dust that seemed to carry decades of stories. We sat around a table, all 4 of us, awkward, tense, and waiting for what we thought would be a standard while reading. Jake leaned back with his usual smugness. Let's just split the estate and get it over with. But Mr. Crenshaw raised a finger. Your father prepared something special. A video, actually. He pressed play on a small monitor, and there he was. My dad, looking thin and tired but still smiling. Hi, kids. If you're watching this, I've passed. And no, I didn't go quietly. You know me, I had a few things to say before I left. Jake, Sarah, Matt, you're probably expecting a breakdown of assets, a nice division of wealth. But before we get into that, I need to say something. Emily, you were my light. You gave me reasons to keep fighting when I had none left. You stayed, you loved, and you never once made me feel like a burden. He paused. I looked over at my siblings. Suddenly, the room wasn't so smug anymore. As for the rest of you, Jake, you always thought the world owed you something. Sarah, you traded family for social status. Matt, you only came around when you wanted something. So, here's what I've decided. And then the will was read to Jake. I leave my collection of books. Perhaps you'll finally learn to listen more and talk less. To Sarah, I leave my watch, not because I think you'll wear it, but because time is something you've always taken for granted. To Matt, I leave my toolbox, though I doubt you'll ever fix the bridges you've burned. And to Emily, I leave the house, the savings account, the business, and everything else I own. Not out of favoritism, but because she earned it. Because she gave and gave and gave without ever asking for anything in return. No one spoke. Not a word. The same mouths that laughed hours earlier were now clamped shut. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I felt my father's presence in that room. I felt his justice.
His love.
His truth. In the weeks that followed, my siblings tried to contact me, emails, phone calls, even guilt trips. We're still family, they said. Dad would want us to be close. But I knew better. I kept the letter. Framed it, actually. Put it on the mantel in the living room of the house they all thought would be theirs. Because in the end, they laughed at me, but after the will was read out loud, They were the punchline, and I finally got the peace my dad always wanted for. The funeral itself was tense, more like a performance than a goodbye. My siblings, Jake, Sarah, and Nat showed up dressed in black, faces somber, but their presence didn't feel real. They hadn't seen Dad in over a year. Not for his birthdays, not when he went in for surgery, not when he couldn't walk up the stairs anymore. But now here they were, playing the role of grieving children in front of the extended family and neighbors. I stood at the pulpit, reading the eulogy I had spent nights writing. My voice trembled with each sentence, but I held myself together. For Dad, I owed him that. I spoke about his kindness, how he taught me to ride a bike, how he once stayed up all night fixing my science project when I was in 5th grade. I tried to make them remember the man they had all forgotten. Jake, though, wasn't even pretending to be respectful. From where I stood, I saw him whisper something to Sarah. She giggled, and he rolled his eyes. My stomach turned. Were they laughing at me, at Dad, at the entire ceremony? It felt cruel. And as I continued, pouring out my grief, I heard Matt's voice from behind me. She's always been dramatic, he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I paused for a second, but didn't let myself react. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I finished my speech, my throat tight, and returned to my seat, clutching the folded piece of paper in my hand like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. After the service, we were invited to Dad's lawyer's office, Mr. Crenshaw. I had known the man since I was a teenager.
He was quiet, methodical, the type of man who weighed every word. The invitation wasn't unexpected.
Dad had told me vaguely that he'd made some arrangements. But I never imagined what was coming. The 4 of us sat down in a small room with leather chairs and wood-paneled walls. It smelled faintly of old books and coffee. A single manila envelope sat in the center of the table. Jake leaned back in his chair, sighing dramatically. Let's get this over with, he said. We know who the house is going to. He looked at Sarah and Matt as if it were already settled, like Dad's life and everything he'd worked for was just waiting to be carved up between them. He didn't look at me once. In his mind, I didn't count. I stared at the floor, quietly fuming. They had already divided up the estate in their heads. Jake wanted the $1 million family home. Matt had always had his eyes on the auto repair business Dad had built from scratch. Sarah? She'd probably take the jewelry, the art collection, maybe sell it off and brag to her friends about how her dear father left her something meaningful. But Mr. Crenshaw didn't open the envelope. Instead, he reached for a small remote and pressed a button. The television in the corner of the room came to life, and my breath caught when I saw Dad's face on the screen. He looked thinner, weaker than I remembered. This must have been recorded during his last weeks. But his eyes were clear and his voice was strong. If you're watching this, he began, I've already left this world. And if I'm being honest, I didn't want to go without saying a few things first. I looked around. Jake sat up straighter. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Matt folded his arms. Dad continued. This isn't going to be a traditional will reading. I didn't want to leave behind confusion or bitterness. So I'm going to explain everything myself. My heart pounded. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew whatever it wasn't going to be what they expected. He looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking straight at us. Jake, he said, you've always assumed everything would be handed to you. You visited only once after I got sick. And even then, you spent most of the time complaining about the air conditioning. I love you, but love doesn't mean I have to reward neglect. Jake's mouth dropped slightly. He didn't move, didn't speak. Sarah, Dad said next. I missed you. I really did. But I stopped calling after the 5th time you sent my call to voicemail on Father's Day. I know your life is busy, but I needed my daughter, and she wasn't there. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Matt, he said, pausing for just a moment. You were the one I thought would show up when it mattered. But when I asked you to drive me to the hospital and you told me you were too tired, I realized I had to stop hoping. The room was silent now. No one dared to laugh. No one looked at each other, and then his eyes softened. But Emily, Dad smiled. You gave me more than I ever deserved. You didn't just take care of me, you gave me dignity when I had none left. You reminded me what love feels like. Tears welled in my eyes. The screen went black. And Mr. Crenshaw finally opened the envelope. The will has been legally signed and notarized, he said. Your father's decisions are final.
He began to read, to Jake.
I leave a copy of my first paycheck and a note. Earn it yourself. To Sarah, I leave my watch, the one she used to ask about as a child. I hope it reminds her how fast time can slip away. To Matt, I leave my toolbox, empty, like the promises he made. And to Emily, my daughter, my caregiver, my friend, I leave the house, the business, all financial assets, and my personal belongings. Use them well. You've earned it. No one spoke. No one dared. The air felt heavy, like something sacred had just passed through the room. I stood up quietly and walked toward the door. For once they weren't laughing. They were stunned, speechless, and as I stepped outside into the sunlight, I smiled not because I had inherited anything, but because, for the first time in my life, my father had made them all see me. Really see me, and that was worth more than anything he could have ever left behind. The TV flickered on. A soft hum filled the room. And then there he was, Dad, sitting in his favorite old armchair, the one by the living room window that caught the afternoon sun. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders hunched, his skin pale, the fight clearly leaving his body, but somehow he was still smiling. That warm, steady smile I'd known all my life. If you're watching this, he said gently, I'm probably already gone.
And?
I know, some of you might be confused about my decisions. But trust me, they're earned. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. But it was firm. It carried the kind of weight that only comes from a man who had thought long and hard about every word he wanted to say. He wasn't just reading a statement. He was speaking his truth. He shifted slightly in his seat and looked directly into the camera, directly into the room. You could feel the air shift. My siblings were suddenly still. Even Jake, who'd been casually spinning a pen between his fingers, stopped cold. Jake, Matt, Sarah. Dad said each name slowly, as if taking a moment to really see them again. I needed you. And you weren't there. You showed up when it was convenient, when it looked good. But when I was in pain, when I was scared, weak, sick, you weren't beside me. I swallowed hard, sitting frozen as his words sank in. Dad's voice didn't rise. He didn't rant. He just laid it out like a man settling his soul. I don't say this to hurt you, he continued. But I say it because the truth matters. It's the last thing I have left to give. When I couldn't hold a spoon, when I cried from the pain, it wasn't any of you who came. It was Emily, she bathed me, she fed me. She held my hand at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep and told me stories to keep my mind off the cancer. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't prepared for this part. I thought the video might be formal, maybe brief. But this was raw, real, and deeply personal. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah shift uncomfortably. Jake scratched his neck and leaned back like he wanted to disappear. Matt clenched his jaw, staring at the screen as if trying to find a loophole in Dad's words. Dad
continued, so here's how this is going to go.
That's when Mr. Crenshaw, the layer, hit pause. The image froze on my father's face, tired, brave, honest. The silence in the room was deafening. For the first time since the funeral, no one had anything to say, not a joke. Not a scoff. Not even a sigh. The smugness, the entitlement, The assumptions they all carried into this office vanished in one breath. Mr. Crenshaw cleared his throat and slowly reached for a thick envelope. He opened it with practiced precision and pulled out the papers inside. "This is your father's final will and testament," he said. "Signed, witnessed, and legally binding." He unfolded the document, and the room seemed to shrink as he began to read. "To my son Jake," he read, "who once said, 'Dad's just old and bitter now. I leave my old record collection. Not because I think you'll appreciate the music, but because maybe for once you'll listen to something other than your own voice.'" Jake's eyes twitched. He looked like he wanted to protest, but knew there was nothing to say. "To Matt," Mr. Crenshaw continued, "who borrowed my truck and never returned it until the engine gave out. I leave the keys." "To what?" you ask. "Nothing, just the keys. I figured that's what you cared about most anyway." Matt made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut.
He shifted in his seat, arms crossed tightly. "To Sarah, Mr. Crenshaw."
Reed, who always said she had more important things to do than visit her old man. "I leave my collection of watches. May you one day realize that time doesn't wait for anyone? And when it runs out, no one gets it back." Sarah blinked hard, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to speak but not knowing how. Then came the part I wasn't sure I was ready for. "To my Emily," the lawyer said, his voice softening just a bit. "The one who never asked for anything, the one who gave everything. I leave the house, the business, my savings, and everything else I own. Not as a reward, but as recognition. You showed me the kind of love a parent prays for, but rarely receives. You brought me peace in my darkest hour. You were my strength when I had none. You didn't walk away. So now ... I leave you the life I built." Tears ran down my cheeks. Silent and unstoppable. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know he would say it like that. In front of them. Out loud. Public. Permanent. I looked around the room. Jake was pale, his jaw clenched tight. Sarah stared at the floor, red creeping into her cheeks. Matt just shook his head slowly, eyes glossy, but not from tears, maybe regret. No one was laughing anymore. The silence said everything. These were the same people who mocked me at the funeral, who whispered and laughed while I cried at the podium, who treated me like I didn't matter, like I was just emotional Emily. But now, here they were, stunned into silence by a man who was no longer alive but whose voice had never been louder. Mr. Crenshaw folded the will and set it gently on the table. "That concludes the reading," he said. "Your father made his
Decision's clear?"
I stood slowly, my knees trembling beneath me. Not from victory, not from revenge, but from the weight of finally being seen. Truly, undeniably seen. As I walked toward the door, I paused and turned. They didn't look at me. They couldn't, and I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Dad had already spoken for me. And that was more than enough. Mr. Crenshaw cleared his throat. The thick envelope in his hands was already trembling slightly, though whether from age or anticipation I couldn't tell. The rest of the room sat in dead silence, like the breath had been sucked out of it. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. "To my son Jake," he said, his voice even and deliberate, "who once told me I was a burden." I saw Jake blink, the corner of his mouth twitching like he was trying to hold in a sarcastic remark. But then came the next line. "I leave nothing but a copy of the hospital bill I paid for when he broke his leg at 15. Silence. Hospital bill. You could feel the air shift. A ripple of awkwardness passed through the room. Jake leaned forward, blinking as if trying to make sense of it. "Wait, what?" But Mr. Crenshaw didn't stop. "To Sarah," he continued, "who missed every Father's Day for 10 years. Sarah's lips parted slightly. She had just smoothed her dress and was sitting with one ankle crossed over the other, all poise and composure. But suddenly she seemed a little less sure of herself. "I leave my old watch." It stopped ticking, just like our relationship. My breath caught in my throat. Not because I was surprised by the bluntness, but because I knew exactly which watch he meant. The silver one with the cracked leather strap, the one he used to wear when I was a child and would joke that it helped him stay on dad time. It hadn't worked in years, but he still kept it in the top drawer of his knitstand. I remember winding it once as a kid, thinking I could bring it back to life. But like so many things in his world, it had just stopped, and no one had noticed. Sarah's face had gone red. Her composure cracked right down the middle. But still, no one said anything. Not yet. Mr. Crenshaw moved on. To Matt, he said. Who sold my tools without asking? Matt's shoulders immediately tensed. He turned toward the lawyer like he was about to object, but then froze. I leave an empty toolbox. Maybe. Now you'll learn to build something on your own. That line hit like a punch. You could hear a pin drop in the room. I looked down at my lap, trying to hold it together. These weren't gifts. They were lessons. They were truths Dad hadn't spoken out loud when he was alive, either because he didn't want conflict or because he still had hope they'd change. But now, with nothing left to lose, he said everything he needed to say. And then came the words I'll never forget. To Emily, Mr. Crenshaw said, his voice softening just slightly. My rock, my caretaker, and the only one who truly loved me. I lifted my head, my heart was pounding. It was like time slowed in that moment. The air was heavier, thicker. I leave everything. Everything. My breath caught. The house, the savings, the business, Mr. Crenshaw continued. And yes, even the '68 Mustang. I sat there frozen, unable to process it fully. That Mustang had been my father's pride and joy. He'd spent 10 years restoring it. I'd helped him polish the chrome in the summers, just the two of us in the garage. Music playing low in the background. It wasn't just a car. It was him. My siblings were stunned. The expressions on their faces shifted in rapid waves. Shock, confusion, anger, disbelief. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then finally she snapped. This is a joke. She blurted out, rising from her chair. This has to be a joke. Her voice cracked, not with grief but with fury. Jake scoffed loudly and stood as well, pacing near the corner of the room. Seriously? She gets everything? She barely has a job. She's the baby. This isn't fair. Matt remained seated, fists clenched in his lap, his jaw tight. Mr. Crenshaw didn't flinch.
He simply looked over the top of his glasses and replied calmly, Everything is legal. Your father made sure of it.
There was no room for debate, no loopholes, no technicalities. He pulled out document after document, signed, witnessed, notarized. Dad had been thorough. He knew they'd push back. He knew this wouldn't go down without resistance. But he'd been ready. Jake began mumbling under his breath, pacing faster now. This is crazy. She must have manipulated him or something. Got in his ear while he was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Crenshaw looked at him, unfazed. Your father was of sound mind when he signed these papers. You're welcome to challenge it in court, but I assure you it will hold. Sarah sat back down, arms folded so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together with force. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had closed up. The room was spinning slightly, not because I was overwhelmed by what I'd received, but by the weight of it. The weight of being seen, of being appreciated, of finally being acknowledged after all these years of being treated like an afterthought. I thought about all those nights I spent rubbing Dad's back as he coughed through his pain. The mornings I cleaned up after him when he was too embarrassed to ask, the meals I made, the appointments I scheduled, the comfort I offered. I never did it expecting anything in return. I did it because I loved him, because he was my father. And now, in front of the people who had always dismissed me, belittled me, and overlooked me, he made sure my love wasn't invisible. I slowly stood, my legs still shaky. My siblings glared as if I had orchestrated the whole thing, but I didn't need to justify myself. My father had already said everything that mattered. Without a word, I walked toward the door. Before I left, I paused, glancing over my shoulder one last time. They sat in silence, mouths shut. Egos bruised, faces pale. No more laughter. No more jokes. And for the first time in my life, I walked away feeling seen, valued, and free. The next few days were a whirlwind, not because the world was watching, not because the news came knocking. The media didn't care. There were no reporters, no headlines, no viral moments. But inside the walls of our family, it was like a storm had been unleashed. Phones buzzed nonstop. Group chats that had been silent for years suddenly lit up. Not with sympathy, not with healing words, but with guilt trips, accusations. Emotional blackmail dressed up as concerned. Matt was the first to say it. You're tearing this family apart. As if I had done something wrong. As if honoring my father's final wishes, the ones he took time to record with clarity and love, was an act of war. I didn't reply to his message. I didn't need to. Deep down, I think even Matt knew the truth that this family had already torn itself apart long before the will was ever read. Jake sent a voice message, slurring his way through a half-hearted attempt at peace. I mean, come on, you could have said something. You knew he was planning this, right? You could have shared it with us. I could have. But I didn't, because the truth is, I hadn't known every detail. Yes, Dad mentioned that he was making things official. Yes, I knew he had opinions about the choices my siblings had made, or failed to make, but I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask for the house, or the money, or the car. I would have sat with him through those endless nights, even if he left me nothing but a thank you and a memory, but he gave me more.
He gave me validation, a final word that said, I saw you.
I appreciated you. You mattered to me. That was something they could never take away. I moved into Dad's house 2 weeks after the funeral. I didn't change much. I couldn't. His smell still lingered in the hallway, cologne and coffee and old books. I left the worn-out recliner where it was. The dent in the cushions reminded me of all the quiet nights we sat there together, watching old movies while I massaged his swollen feet. I kept the faded photographs on the mantel, Mom and Dad young and glowing. All of us kids smiling in coordinated outfits that we hated at the time, but now seemed frozen in a happier version of the past. The house was more than a house. It was memory. It was echo. It was presence, and I honored it. I reopened Dad's garage business the following month. The locals were surprised, most of them expecting it to close for good, but I learned from him. I watched him work that shop like a maestro, grease on his hands, music in his veins. He once said fixing cars was like solving puzzles with your soul. I never understood it until I ran the place myself. Every clink of a wrench, every hum of an engine, felt like a heartbeat being revived. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to be him. But keeping his business alive felt like the least I could do after everything he'd given me, not just in death, but in life. And every morning before the shop opens, I take a slow drive around the neighborhood. In that '68 Mustang. Dad single quotes S Mustang. The one he polished every Sunday. The one he took me for ice cream runs in when I was 10. The one he taught me how to drive in, screaming with fake terror every time I hit the brakes too hard. He left a mixtape in the glove box the day I turned 18. I didn't listen to it much back then, but now I play it every morning. The songs are old, some even older than him, but they hit differently now. Each lyric feels like a message, a memory, a reminder that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and consistent, like an old man slowly building a life for someone he believes deserves more. And you know what? They still don't speak. To me. Not Jake, not Sarah, not Matt. Oh, there were attempts. A couple of cold texts, a cousin who tried to mediate, a Christmas card with just their names, no message. But none of it stuck. None of it came with real apology. Just thin, bitter threads pretending to be bridges, and I'm okay with that, because I've learned something in all of this. Peace doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. It comes from knowing who you are, what you've done, and what you've survived. When they laughed at me at the funeral, they thought I was weak. They thought my tears were signs of fragility, that my silence was submission, that my love for Dad made me a doormat, someone easy to overlook, someone soft and forgettable. But when that will was read out loud, when my father's voice echoed through the room and stripped away every lie, every performance, every fake hug and empty word, they finally realized who I truly was. I wasn't weak. I was the one he trusted with his truth. I was the one who stayed. And maybe, just maybe, I was the daughter he'd always hoped for. If this story touched you, or reminded you of the power of love, loyalty, and standing your ground, don't forget to hit that like button.
And if
You want more emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment that matters. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay true.